The Comfortably Zoned Radio Network presents Weighted Donuts with your hosts Wayne Unger and Craig Stier.
Hello and welcome to this week's show of Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger. I'm here with my co-host Craig Stier. How are you, Craig?
I'm fine, Wayne.
That's good. And we have a special guest, a returning guest. It's always good when we get returning guests. We have Jerry Crasnick from ESPN. Jerry, hello, how are you? And once again, thank you very much for coming on.
Sure. How are you guys?
We're
good.
Doing
Thanks.
good.
We're doing
we
good.
really appreciate you coming on. We've been following you for a long time. You do great work.
Thank you.
Before you jumped on, Wayne and I were talking about. We started talking about the Rookies of the Year awards being handed out today, but the bigger news for me was that Jeremy Hellickson is getting paid $17 million a year, and there's just something that just drives me crazy. Am I nuts? Or is I'm 57 years old, and I just think back to what Bob Gibson and what the guys would be making. Jeremy Hellickson is making $17 million a year. That's great.
Yeah, well, it's only 1 year, so that's why it's going to be more. And baseball obviously has changed a lot since the late 60s. That's when I first started watching baseball myself. And, the union ushered in bigger salaries, and free agency has changed a lot of things. And baseball's about a $10 billion industry right now. So the players are going to get their cut, and Jeremy Hellickson is one of them. He did very well for himself, but there was some doubt right up until the end whether he would even take this because, it's a weak free agent market, and could he have gone out maybe and gotten a 3 or 4 year deal and gotten maybe, $40 million or $45 million or something like that at a smaller annual salary. And he decided to take the sure thing, and probably a smart decision on his part.
From what I read, go ahead, Craig.
Could he have gotten a 3-year deal someplace, do you think?
I would think the chances might have been decent of that. The problem is he wouldn't have gotten the $17 million a year if he went out, got 3 years. But when you look at the other guys, Rich Hill and Ivan Nova and Jason Hamill and Andrew Kashner, it's really a pretty historically weak free agent market. So I think he might have been, gotten a multi-year deal. He's not that old. He's a pretty reliable guy. He's probably more of a number 4 starter, a 5 on a really good staff. But he is pretty reliable. He knows how to pitch, doesn't have great velocity, but, he survived, did pretty well in a small ballpark in Philadelphia. And, he's probably one of these guys who might have gone out there and had stars in his eyes, and the next thing you know, you look up and it's late January and he's still waiting for a contract. So I can't really blame a guy like that. It's $17.2 million for 1 year can pretty much set you up for life.
Oh, from what I read, his agents, and I believe Boris is his agent, they did their homework. And what they found is that a lot of teams, while they liked him, a lot of teams were reluctant to give up the draft pick to sign him. So
those fringe guys are really weighed down by the draft pick compensation. So if it's Yoenis Cespedes, and you think he's going to hit 4th and start in left field and hit 35 homers, you'll give up the draft pick. But are you really going to give up the draft pick for a guy like Jeremy Hellickson? So this is something they might address in the current CBA negotiations and maybe do away with next time, or at least modify. But I think Scott Boras has had some experience with guys, Stephen Drew, I think, and Kendrys Morales, and guys that he took out there, and this draft pick compensation really killed their market.
Yeah, I mean, and if if he stays healthy, and he has the same kind of year. I mean, he had an okay year. It's like you say, he's a number 4 starter. Because he played for a very poor team, he almost looked like an ace, but he really, he's like a number 4 starter, but number 4 starters, reliable ones, get paid very handsomely. So if he can stay healthy and somewhat duplicate his year, well, then you know what? He may get it. And of course, if the same system is in place, I would imagine the compensation, the qualifying offer might hit $20 million next year, being how it was $14 million last year. And then at $20 million, then the Phillies may not want to roll the dice. And that's part of it too. The Phillies also roll the dice. I don't think the Phillies expected to see him back.
No, I don't think so. I think they thought that he would reject it, and then he'd go out and sign with somebody else, and, they'd get a draft pick out of it. So they're probably not incredibly thrilled by it, but on the other hand, this is a team that really had a lot of money come off the books. Ryan Howard's salary's gone. Carlos Ruiz, they're not really spending anything at this point. So $17 million's a lot for Jeremy Hellickson, but realistically, he's probably a guy who's worth 10 or 12 million bucks, and so you are paying a premium to get him for 1 year. And teams don't mind spending the extra money. I think it's when they get saddled with guys for 5 or 6 or 7 years, that's when they really get antsy, and that's what really can wreck a franchise if you have too many guys like that.
Absolutely. So tell me, did you vote for the Rookie of the Year?
I didn't vote for Rookie of the Year. I actually have a National League MVP vote, which I can't reveal, but
I certainly understand that. Yes. Okay. And listen, Seager was a slam dunk. And would you say that Fulmer was absolutely 100% the right call as well?
Yeah, I would have voted for Fulmer. I looked yesterday. I've been kind of busy, obviously, with other things with the postseason, and I went back and looked at his numbers, and he had a pretty nice year for a pitcher who came up in late April and really did a great job. Had an extended run, I think, around in June where he was just outstanding for 10 or 12 starts. So, I tend to give the benefit of the doubt to the guy who last through an entire season, and he lasted through most of the season, whereas Sanchez for the Yankees obviously was terrific, but 2 months for me, 55 games or whatever it was, 53 games, it's just not quite enough. I know Willie McCovey won a Rookie of the Year vote with that kind of exposure, but I just tend to favor the guy who goes through the whole year because he's dealing with the injuries and the slumps and really contributing. So if I had a vote there, I would have voted for Fulmer.
No, I listen, I'm a Yankee fan, and I agree with you 100%. No doubt about it. He just, Sanchez just wasn't there long enough. And, and while he was spectacular in his 2 months and, the Yankees actually played better than everyone expected, when they brought up all their young players, people, because he pitched in Detroit, a lot was lost on how important Fulmer was to the Tigers as well, because he stepped in. Jordan Zimmerman went down, and he was one of the pitchers that kept him in the race. So he might have been overall he might have been the third or fourth most valuable player on that team, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about Verlander, Cabrera, Ian Kinsler, also on that team, that's not a bad place to be.
No, I think, look, I think he's a worthy guy. It wasn't a great American League Rookie of the Year class, and obviously, as you mentioned in the National League, Seager was the far and away choice. Seager to me, I think is, he's a top 3 MVP, player. So, he was the easy choice, the no-brainer in the National League, and I think the voters did a good job.
Now, so you say you have a... Go ahead, Craig. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Craig.
Oh, so all right. So we can't touch on, we won't touch on the National League MVP, But can we just go through who you would have selected for the AL MVP and the two Cy Young awards?
Yeah, I mean, I probably need to hone in on this a little bit more because I did my vote at the end of the season, and I was just running around like crazy for the postseason, and it was I didn't have much time. Think I would go with Verlander in the American League. I mean, I looked. He and Kluber looked like they were pretty close. Verlander had just a massive amount of strikeouts. So I think I would go with him. National League, I really need to have the numbers in front of me. I think my initial inclination would be to go for Max Scherzer, but with the other two guys, I think are Lester and Hendricks, right? So,
right.
That's going to be a pretty interesting call, I think. As I said, I think would go for Scherzer, but I think that might be one where the votes are spread around a little bit. And obviously the big one is the American League MVP. That's the one I think is going to cause some controversy. There seems to be sort of a movement toward Mike Trout this year. It's almost like an appreciation award, I think, for him being the best player in baseball on a bad team. I'm not embracing it quite as fervently as some people, only because I do think there is something to, if you're the most valuable player and it's close, I think, a guy who played for a winning team that got to the postseason, I tend to give the benefit of the doubt a little bit. So I might lean toward Mookie Betts a little bit, but I do understand that he had Bogarts and he had David Ortiz and he had a much better team around him. So I understand where people are coming from with Trout. I just, I think we're all conditioned. There've only been like maybe, 5 in history, I think, where the guys even played on a sub-500 team and won an MVP. So, I have to get my mind around that a little bit, and I don't know that I have quite yet. I think if they called it, hey, most outstanding player or best player, you could pick Mike Trout every single year. But I just looked at the totality of their accomplishments, and Trout was much better at on-base percentage, wins above replacement, which is sort of the in stat now. I think Trout was at 10.6, wins above replacement, and Betts was a 9.6. So I didn't see a huge gap there. I think if I had to vote, I probably would have voted for Betts, but certainly respect people who vote for Trout.
Now, how does it work, Jerry? How do you have votes for a given award and not for others?
Well, they do it. You have 16 teams? 15 teams in each league, and I think you have 2 at-large voters, and I think you have 2 representatives from each city. So, 2 Detroit beat writers will vote, and 2 people in Cleveland will vote. They try to spread it around among chapters. I'm in actually the Baltimore-Washington chapter, even though I live in Philly, so I get a ballot, from them. Last year I think I had the Cy Young Award, and this year I got the MVP. So it just depends. I think the local chapters sort of sit down and decide who can vote and who can't or who will vote, and, for each award. And the one thing that's made it a little bit more difficult now is there are certain papers, I think, like the New York Times and, some other papers that won't even allow their writers to vote for these things. So the membership's gone down because newspapers have folded, and so that, I think it's a little more of a challenge for the BBWAA to find really qualified, knowledgeable voters.
So when do you find out? When did you find out that you're voting? You were getting a National League MVP vote. I mean, is it at the end of the season?
We just get an email from the Baseball Writers Association sometime around mid-September. So, I kind of looked since I had the NL MVP, and you actually have 10 spots you have to pick. You really try to. you try to weight a lot of different things, and I'll talk to maybe people who covered the team and see what they think, and obviously you look at the statistics, and the statistics have gotten more progressive. You used to look at batting average and RBIs, and now you look at BABIP and wins above replacement and home road splits and a million different things, close and late situations and how they fared against different teams, and defensive and base running metrics. There's a lot to it, and I try not to be a slave to the numbers. I try to use maybe some what I feel are instincts or intuition as to how much a guy helped his team. But in the National League it was a little bit easier this year. I think there was a select group of maybe 4 or 5 guys, and filling out the back end of the ballot was probably the most challenging part for me.
Now, is it widely known? Is it widely known who's voting? I understand in the cities, the major league cities, where there are 2 beat writers and whatnot. But do you get lobbied? Does anyone know that you're voting per se for that award?
Well, they don't know. I don't think the teams know. But we will get things from teams for awards. It's not like they lavish us with gifts or anything. It's not like the Oscar or the Golden Globes or anything. But we will get we will get some emails from teams saying, hey, Jose Altuve, just so you're aware, here's a little email packet or whatever of things that he's done this year that make him special. So same thing with the Hall of Fame. We'll get there'll be some groups might be behind a certain candidate, and we'll get little, emails about Edgar Martinez or this guy or that, just trying to sort of make us aware of different things. So, but, I got it in mind. Like I said, I got my vote in mid-September, and really the last weekend of the season, I sat down for probably, I'd say a good couple hours and really just looked at all the candidates and just tried to distinguish between them, and had to send in my vote by the end of the regular season because you got to get it in before the playoffs.
Right.
Do you think at some point non-print writers will get votes for awards?
I'm not sure. The Baseball Writers Association has been doing this for a long time, and I don't know that I'd say we're territorial, but I think they value this, being able to vote on these things. And, for the Hall of Fame, I haven't really been too resistant to the thought of, other people, internet writers or even broadcasters or whatever who are knowledgeable voting. But right now they've just really entrusted it to the baseball writers. And I think the writers generally do a pretty good job. I mean, I know some people would disagree with that, especially now, because there's so many things you can read online and places you can go and sort of read other opinions. And, you're going to be really, you're not going to have an information deficit. You don't have to do a whole lot of work to really kind of know the pro and con arguments. And to me, it's just a matter of sort of voting your conscience and trying to come up with a vote that is defensible.
Right. I mean, I didn't ask the question because I thought that the baseball writers do a bad job. I asked the question more in regards to, newspapers are, seem to be heading the way of the dinosaur. So that's why I asked the question. If you, for that reason, if you thought that at some point it might turn to that. So
yeah, they might have to. I mean, most of the teams still have a couple of writers who cover them. Even newspapers that don't have great readership, still are online. So, one of the debates I think we've had was Major League Baseball, MLB.com. Since they're an arm of Major League Baseball, are their writers independent enough to vote on these things? And I'm pretty sure they came back and the MLB.com writers with the requisite tenure are on the Hall of Fame rolls now. I think they vote for the Hall of Fame. I can't remember if they vote for these awards. I don't think so. But it is going to become an issue because the more newspapers die out, the fewer available voters there are.
Right, exactly. So you were at the GM meetings last week. I mean, a lot, there, of course, a lot of things have been reported. We have a lot of Yankee and Met fans that listen to us. I mean, I'm guessing 20 out of the 25 people that listen to our show are New York based. And anything as far as the Yankees go, do you see them continuing in the direction that they were taking at the end of the season, or do you, other than closer, do you see them coming in and surprising people with a sign or a trade for a more established player for a star?
Well, there's been some Brian McCann buzz. It's been kind of interesting, because he's been rendered sort of irrelevant, maybe, or at least he's been usurped behind the plate, somewhat by Gary Sanchez. So, that's an interesting one of a name you could watch. And then I think the other thing is just look to the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Red Sox and some of these teams. The Yankees have built up a pretty good surplus of young talent now. I mean, they all of a sudden have young kids in their system. And do they stick with these kids and kind of go younger and really remake their team, or do they try to package 3 or 4 of them and get a Chris Sale or a Chris Archer or Sonny Gray or one of these young pitchers, that they could add to their rotation? And I think that's really going to be something that's interesting to watch is, the Yankees really did do a nice job of trading off guys like Miller and Chapman and going young. But, do they maintain the patience and wait for these kids to get to the big leagues and, have a younger, more athletic, fun team, or do they, lapse into Yankee mode and try to trade 3 of them this winter and get one of those ace pitchers out there?
Right. And what about the Mets? Do you see them re-signing Cespedes or making a big pitch to re-sign him?
Well, certainly they'll try, but, I think he's the best guy out there. And, the interesting thing with Cespedes is as great as, as good a year as he had this year, he was really in a better bargaining position last year, and he got a 3-year deal with a 1-year opt-out. So, I don't know that teams trust Cespedes that much to give him a 5 or 6 year contract. I just think he's a great talent, but sometimes they wonder if his mind sort of wanders and is he always that hungry and committed, that sort of thing. And maybe it's not 100% fair, but, I don't know that anybody's going to go to a huge length contract when they wouldn't last year. And there are certainly a bunch of teams that could use a guy like him in the outfield. To me, the interesting thing more is going to be what these teams do in terms of with such a lousy starting pitching market. How motivated are they to make trades? And could you see a guy like Verlander or even Greinke or somebody like that traded this winter? I think that's going to be pretty interesting.
Was there anything interesting? Because I read all your stuff. Last week I read everything you wrote about the GM meetings. Is there anything interesting that you left out? One of these like sitting at the bar or sitting in the lobby? Any kind of tidbit that you picked up that I don't know if scoop is the right word, but just something that, you probably didn't write about, but, you feel as though it wasn't reported on that you think people might find interesting.
Well, the interesting thing I think was, and I don't need to get too much into this, but, last week at the GM meetings was when the election was being held. And I think that was pretty interesting to see some of the reactions of writers and even front office people, reacting to what happened. I can't get too much into detail, but you had a lot of people in one place watching a pretty, big emotional event. And that was something that, you can't write about it, isn't baseball related, but, you kind of learned who stood where on some things, just from being around it.
Okay. Did anything get heated as far as discussion goes as far as supporting one candidate or another?
No, there was none of that. And, again, I don't know how interesting people find that. I just think, in general, I think this is kind of interesting. Back in the day, I think you had the front office makeup. You might have had older guys who were scouts and, came from different areas. And now you have a lot of younger GMs who maybe come from the East and went to Ivy schools. So I think the orientation of your typical front office person is probably a little bit more liberal than it used to be years ago.
Right. Interesting. So, now, oh God, I just lost my thought. So, Craig, go ahead. I know you got something while I regroup.
We can't. It's an honor to have you here, and I can't go on without just asking you your take on the World Series, which I thought was just what this country needed. I thought it was just a great World Series.
Yeah, it was great, and I spent, and I didn't mean to digress with that last thing. It was just the one thing that popped into my head when I was out there.
Oh no, it was quite interesting. It was quite welcome.
There was a courtyard, out in the middle, and writers were sitting there, and a couple of, general managers came by and sort of like were lamenting what had happened, and it kind of broke through the typical conversation I think that we always have with front office people, which is always about, who you're trading and who you're going to sign and all that kind of stuff. And I think we all get to see each other as people a little bit more, But as far as the World Series, I spent the whole month following Cleveland. I covered the American League. So I wasn't around that Cubs mania and that Cubs, just wave of media attention that they had. Cleveland wound up playing Toronto and Boston, and they didn't have as big a pack following them, and I think most people kept waiting for them to get bounced, and I really enjoyed covering that team. They were a lot of fun. Terry Francona was just wonderful to be around, and Andrew Miller with what he did. I mean, I would say that, I've been doing this for a long time, and that was one of the more amazing Octobers I've ever seen from anybody. So, to see Cleveland get there and take the Cubs to the limit when the Cubs were so highly favored, and it looked at one point like, the Indians were going to do away with them, and for the Cubs to come back like they did, and especially have such a great Game 7 with, the stadium half Indians fans and half Cubs fans who went to Cleveland. It was fabulous. It was really an excellent postseason.
Now, after that World Series, do you see closes going more than an inning, a bit more this year? I know you can't do it all the time, but do you think that strategy will be employed a bit more during the regular season this year?
I think it opens some eyes, yeah, and I think it also opens some eyes to the fact that sometimes your most valuable reliever isn't necessarily your closer. It could be a guy who comes in the seventh inning with the bases loaded and strikes somebody out to get out of the inning. There are certain flash points in a game, and I think we become conditioned to think that the 3 outs in the ninth are the most important, and not necessarily. Sometimes out you get in the sixth or the seventh is more important. I think it's going to be difficult, though, for any team to say, hey, Andrew Miller was great. Let's get this super reliever and have him pitch 2 1/3 or, 3 innings, kind of like Goose Gossage used to do. It's just not really done that way anymore, and I think that would be difficult to sustain over a 162-game season. But it really did, I think, open the eyes of people to creative use of bullpens, and, I think maybe we'll start to see that a little bit more moving forward.
Yeah, or possibly even seeing some mediocre starters who really just can't go through the lineup multiple times. Maybe we'll see that type of, for lack of a better term, that type of hybrid type pitcher.
Yeah, I mean, I know today, and somebody mentioned like 3 different guys, and I know Andrew Kashner was one of them. You know, he's got really good stuff, and he's just never quite panned out as a starter. I know Wade Davis was kind of that guy too, and Andrew Miller was. You know, sometimes for these guys, it's hard to pitch 6 or 7 innings, and you know, if you're a big, tall guy, maybe you can't maintain your command or your release point, and these guys have become so valuable. You know, I think they used to be kind of, it was like the refuge for failed starters, but I think teams are going to start to look for those guys now and be able to plug them into their bullpen and have them pitch 70 or 80 innings, and they could become hugely valuable guys, and they can make pretty good money.
Absolutely. I mean, and also we saw it the other way around. We saw, you know, when it gets down to the last game, it's all hands on deck. I mean, we saw it last year. We saw it 2 years ago with Bumgarner. We saw it even back in 2001 with Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling. I mean, they came in and pitched relief. We saw it with Bumgarner. We saw it with Kershaw. We saw it with Lester. It's I mean, just like teams are looking for flexibility with position players as far as being able to play multiple positions. Who knows? We may be seeing something new. It would be nice. I really, I personally didn't care for the pigeonhole relief roles that have evolved in the past years myself.
No, I agree. I think sometimes it's gotten so regimented, and that was what was so refreshing about Andrew Miller was he said, look, I'm just, you know, if they want to use me in the 6th, I'll come in the 6th. If they want me to close, I'll do that. And that's why he was such a great teammate. I do think it's difficult, like I said, over the course of an entire season because guys do get comfortable in their roles and preparing, but there's no reason you can't take the wraps off a little bit, and maybe that's the Indians' contribution to, you know, new baseball thinking.
Right. Let me go. We're going to stay along the World Series, but if I remember correctly, you were a writer in Cincinnati for a time.
Yeah, for 5 years in the late '80s and early '90s.
Okay. Now, I mean, most people seem to have loved Pete Rose, you know, on the Fox pregame and postgame show. If Rose was on the ballot, well, one, do you think he should be on the ballot? And if he was on the ballot, would you vote for him? Would you vote him into the Hall of Fame? Would you get your vote?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that ship has kind of sailed. You know, I think he's not going to be on the ballot, you know, because the time has expired, and you know, Rob Manfred has ruled not to reinstate him. So I think anything that we talk about with him now is just kind of an academic exercise, and I honestly just don't think. I think he's had his opportunity, and it's come and gone, and I honestly don't think he's ever going to get on a ballot. It's certainly not with the baseball writers, and I don't think he's going to get on it with the Veterans Committee.
Right. Okay. That's fair. Craig.
This is a little off the beaten track, but I also was doing a little bit of Jerry Crasnick research, and I see that you graduated from BU in 1980. I started law school there in 81, and I lived on Comm Ave, and I walked past T. Anthony's, and I would go in there and see the hockey jerseys, and it struck me that you were there when a lot of those guys from the Olympic team were playing hockey for BU, correct?
Yeah, I was there when they had the national title team with Jim Craig, and Mike Ruzioni, and Jack O'Callahan, and Dave Silk, and all those guys, and they went to the Olympics. So yeah, that were great times for BU hockey. It was, the football team wasn't great. The basketball team didn't really draw, but hockey was, best in the nation there for a couple of years, and it was a big event. It was a lot of fun to go watch the games when I was a Terrier.
Yeah, I used to go. When I was there, Rick Pitino actually was the basketball coach, and
Right.
Hockey, hockey ruled. They were a very, very solid team from '81 to '84. No national championships or anything like that, but those hockey games are great. Did you write for?
Yeah, I actually worked for the Sports Information Office when my senior year when Rick Pitino was the coach, so that was kind of cool. I mean, that was when he was the basketball coach.
That's pretty great. Yeah.
So, Jerry, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I know your time is limited. I don't want to keep you on any longer, but I hope we'll have you back in a couple of months. Like I said, you're my favorite redheaded sports writer. So,
well, I appreciate that, Wayne.
Hey, Jerry, you live in Philly. Were you born in Philly?
No, I was born in Maine, actually. I'm a New Englander, and I moved around. I, lived in Cincinnati and lived in Denver, when I covered the Rockies, and I've been in Philadelphia, the Philly suburbs, since the late 1990s, about 18 years now.
So are your kids Eagles and Philly and diehard Philly fans at this point?
I have two girls who aren't that into sports, although my younger one goes to Penn State, so she's a senior at Penn State, and she's quite into Penn State football right now. She's very excited about it.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about that today. I'm sure you do know, if Ohio State beats Michigan, then Penn State wins the East. Sorry. If Ohio State loses to Michigan, no, I've got this.
No, I think if Ohio State wins, because
right,
Penn State beat Ohio State, so I think they would then play Wisconsin. Maybe is that what it is? I think.
Right, exactly. And so there's a distinct possibility that Ohio State could conceivably make the Final Four.
Right, exactly. Right. But not make the Big Ten, not win the Big Ten championship.
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Well, Penn State's had a great season.
Yeah, it has been. It's been a lot of fun to watch.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been a great revival. I know we're about to go, but it's just I feel as though the football program took an unfair hit years ago with the whole Paterno situation. The program itself should have not have been subject to those sanctions and penalties. That's just my own personal opinion. So.
No, I understand. I think I'm always questioning of whether kids who are at the school now or whatever have to be punished for the sins of somebody else. While pretty abhorrent stuff, but they didn't really have anything to do with it. So it's nice to see the program come back. It's really a proud school, and I know everybody who goes there has a great experience. So it's been a lot of fun to watch them play so well.
Right.
Yep.
So Jerry, we will reach out to you again, and I know winter is it's not a slow season for you. It's like I had Kevin Kernan on last week, and I told him, I said, sports writers, it's like owning a restaurant these days. There's no vacation, there's no time off. It's year round. It's constant. So, unfortunately, you can't partner up with a relative to cover for you a little bit. So,
yeah, I wish. But have a great Thanksgiving, you guys, and
you too. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Craig.
Another great guest. Really interesting. I know I've been following him for seemingly forever. Super bright guy, and good stuff.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who you know me, I'll scan the different sports sites, particularly almost exclusively for baseball. That's what it has evolved for me, and his stuff always catches my eye. That's the bottom line. His stuff always catches my eye.
He's terrific.
So,
all right.
Well, we will be back next week. Of course, you will be hearing this particular podcast next week. Who knows? Possibly even at the same time when we're recording our next one. So, good night, everybody. Oh no, Craig, it's your job.
Well, have a great week. I guess we'll reconvene next week, and we'll be discussing in a little bit more depth I think by the end of this week the MVPs are done. Are the Cy Young Award winners also this week?
I believe everything.
Everything's this week?
I think everything is this week.
Well, hopefully I'll have a terrific guest to talk those over. But at the very least, I'll see you back here next week, and I hope everyone has a good week.
Okay. Have a good night, everybody.